We of Word Up acknowledge that some of us are situated on the traditional land of the Anishinaabe and Huron-Wendat people. Word Up is dedicated to honoring Indigenous history and culture and are committed to moving forward in the spirit of reconciliation and respect with all First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people. Now, I ask that you, if you are not one of the panelists, that you mute your mic during the session. So we will have a period at the end for questions if anybody has questions. Now, obviously, you all know that April is National Poetry Month. It was introduced in 1996, allowing us an opportunity to change our perspectives and look upon poetry as a rhythmic art of expressing one's love and thoughts. So we have three poets here tonight to discuss we have different questions, our normal panel format that we go through. And what we will start with is I'll give each of you 5 minutes to introduce yourselves. So we can go alphabetically if you like. So Christian, did you want to start?
Oh, okay. Hello, my name is Christian Bok. I'm addressing you from the city of Melbourne in Australia right now, where I am speaking on the lands of the Wurundjeri Aboriginal people, who are the original custodians of the land here. And I acknowledge their elders, both past and present, and of course, those with whom we walk into the future together. I'd just like to note that I'm the author of a couple of books of poetry. Some of you might have even heard of. The work you know is probably the work for which I'm best known. I won the Griffin Prize for Poetry in 2002 for this work. I'm currently working on a project entitled The Xenotext, which requires that I write a very short poem, and then through a crazy process of encipherment, I translate it into a genetic sequence and implant it into the genome of a bacterium, replacing part of its genetic code so that it becomes a living embodiment of poetry. I've been working on this project now for 20 years in the hope of being able to get it to work properly in an unkillable bacterium capable of surviving in all kinds of hostile environments so robustly that it could in fact be a poem that might exist on the planet Earth when the sun finally explodes. I'm trying to write a book that lasts forever. I'm currently a fellow in the Royal Society of Canada. I've published numerous articles on the topic of poetry, and I'm one of the founding members of a global poetry movement called Conceptualism, which studies the limit cases of writing, those moments in poetry where somebody says, that's not poetry. My group of friends takes interest and suddenly perks up and begins investigating. I probably would just say I'm an experimental poet. I'm an avant-garde poet interested in the history of innovative practice. Cheers and welcome to everyone here.
Wonderful, thank you. There were many areas in that short introduction that I think we could talk about for a very long time. The genome project sounds fascinating, and in fact, especially since you've been at it for 20 years, it must be you must be very dedicated to the process to do that.
Well, it's more stupidity and stubbornness that would characterize my commitments to any.
That works too, though. That works well.
If it works, if it doesn't, well, then you're a fool.
I would imagine that many things have been accomplished through sheer perseverance and stubbornness, and not necessarily stupidity, but just perseverance. So, Tanis, do you want to go ahead?
Sure. Hi, I'm Tanis MacDonald. I am currently located and coming to you from the traditional territories of the neutral Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee peoples, also known as Waterloo, Ontario. I'm going to start with a modest accomplishment. In 1997, I won a chapbook award. This was early on in my career, and I didn't know whether there was a publishing in my future or not. Here it is. Look. This speaking plant, I won the Acorn Rukeyser Award for it, and I still have a couple of chapters. I didn't know that, yep. And so I show it. I like to show it when people, ask me, how I started, because it's this little modest, stapled. Because it's a true chapbook. It's stapled in the center. It's not perfect bound, but this is how we start. We start by by having our thoughts and writing them down and showing them to other people who say, it's not poetry, it is poetry. And then the conversation begins. So that was my first book, followed by Holding Ground in 2000, published by a very small press, Seraphim Editions in Hamilton. My next two came out with Turnstone Press, Fortune in 2003, and Rue the Day in 2008. And then I took kind of a hiatus from writing poetry to get an academic job. And Christian has just said things about his academic job. I work for Wilfrid Laurier University and teach the writing of poetry and of course the study of poetry as well. And I came out with my last poetry book, Mobile, in 2019. So launched just before the pandemic. So I did have a chance to do some in-person events with that. So I think I'm a poet of really the lyric moment. I'm interested in the lyric moment and how to make our lives sing, even mournful songs and happy songs and all kinds of things. I also have written a textbook, and Pamela's right about textbooks. When you write them, they have a longer life, right? So I'm the author of this book, Out of Line, Daring to Be an Artist Outside the Big City. And that emerged from conversations with my students who would ask me, okay, so you're teaching me how to write this poetry thing. What about everything else? What about the writing life? How do people put put food on the table? How do they keep the wolf from the door? And I realized that was a conversation that needed to be had, but wasn't being had in practical terms. People wanted to know if they had to live in a big city in order to make art, and other, very really good questions. And I thought, well, this deserves more than just 5 minutes of me answering questions in class. And so I wrote a book about it. And I'm also the co-editor of Gush, Menstrual Manifestos for Our Time. And I know Pamela has poems in here with Ariel Gordon and Rosanna Deerchild, which was a huge Horkin anthology that came out a couple of years ago and is still getting some traction. So so that's what I do. I write poetry. I write prose, particularly critical prose and personal essays. I have a book coming out in a couple of months called Straggle: Adventures in Walking While Female, and that's an essay collection. But I'm always writing poetry. And I know when I started to write and publish more prose, people were saying, oh, well, now you won't have to do that poetry thing anymore. And I thought, no. The poetry thing is essential. I will also write prose, but that doesn't mean I'm abandoning poetry. That's me.
Thank you. I'm quite interested in your latest book, Straggle: The Adventures in how did you
Adventures in Walking While Female.
Yes, love that title. I'm very looking forward to that book. And I also wanted to say, if all of you wanted to have a moment to put your websites on in the chat, then that'll at least give people an idea of where to find you. And we also put it in the event announcement and whatnot, but just, to get it out there as many places as possible. So Pamela, go ahead.
Okay, well, I am ancient, right? So there's forever to talk about. And I won't burden you with forever. Okay, so here I am in Toronto, which is many Indigenous peoples are here, but mostly I think the Mississaugas of the Credit, Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, Wendat, and Chippewa. Okay, I think, but also many people, because it's the city, many First Nations, Inuit, Métis, a lot of us here. I was thinking, actually, I realized something, because old people are stupid, and also because I just went through this, lucky, I said, no, the whole process of watching. Carol knew Martin very well. So Carol, and Tanis a little, but Tanis might have been with him a couple of times. But Carol, that was really, well, there's no way to describe it. It just drops out of the sky. It's first dementia, and then it's something that in my little notes I said, because the gods think they are funny, something called CBD. CBD? What? CBD. It was no CBD. It's something called corticobasal degeneration. 6 out of every 100,000 people have it. and therefore nobody knows anything about it because nobody wastes research funds on something that only 6 out of every 100,000 people have. So anyway, I've forgotten everything. So if I sound stupid, it's in addition to the fact that I am stupid, it is also that I've forgotten everything. I was thinking that I had come across Tikaranto, and the meaning is Mohawk. It means trees in the water. But where I come from, where I was born, is called in Arawakan, Zaimaka, which means land of wood and water. So it's interesting. Trees in the water, land of wood and water, something about wood and water and me, I guess. Okay, so I was born, I'm going to give you the whole thing, in Kingston, Jamaica. I went to the nuns at 4. I came out from the nuns at 21. So whatever you see is the doing of the nuns, right? Most of the time in Jamaica, but some very sophisticated, expensive, and exclusive nuns in the United States of America, where me and 5 other brown people integrated this very snooty college. My sister was there too. She enjoyed it absolutely, and I hated every single moment of it. So I think having survived that, it says something about the nuns and something about me. I am going back from the most recent time. So this husband dies. He was a brilliant writer, Carol will affirm. And I have these children, 2 male children, 1 female child. The male children live in Toronto with me. The female child is in the US, where she teaches English, although her parents desperately tried to get her to become a lawyer. So she'd be better placed to support us in our old age. People who teach don't really earn that much money. So, but she was very determined. So my mother was a teacher, my sister, me, and this child. The children all write. The daughter has to publish. Tanis, you know this. Carol, you know this. Christian, you escaped from this, it seems. But anyway, but the boys, the men, I suppose they are, write too. And that's gratifying. It's good to know that the creative experience that saved you. Poetry saved me, really. I was an unpleasant child. Nobody liked me. I was an isolate, but I discovered something, put me on a stage. And I could do a thing. I could open my mouth. And when I opened my mouth, I could have people's attention. And, when I was about 15, I decided that I could not live my life as an isolate. So I completely changed myself, and my sister witnesses to this. So this voluble, noisy person that you see laughing here in front of you is just Pam, somebody pretending to be Pam, not really Pam. What else did I have to say? The first thing, I've been plenty things in my life, right? I'm trained as a language arts teacher, but I have also been an editor of an academic journal for a very long time at the University in Jamaica, University of the West Indies. I also, pardon me, worked in television and radio part-time and found a husband from television. He used to produce programs, I used to present them. I've done other stuff too. He and I started a business, 2 businesses, neither of them succeeded. Artists and writers should not ever venture into business, but we did have a small press for a time, and it published a couple, important people from my point of view. Also published my first book, but that is not the only book it published, and another. So like, I'm not going to show you my books because, it's a fair number of them. I have written critical articles in my life. I do not call myself a critic. And Martin and I wrote a monograph. I do not call myself a scholar. And I find it interesting that people, I don't know, it's interesting how you become names. You name yourself, and a name can function in all kinds of ways, but I won't go there. The first book I published was a collection of children's poems. I write for children. It is the most important thing in a lot of ways in my life. What I have learned about the craft of poetry, I have learned from writing for kids. They're constraints. And once you learn to work within constraints, then you can do anything you like. So nothing much else about me. switched out of poetry into prose because a very famous writerly friend whose name I will not call said, Pam, I just discovered that if I try to earn a living from writing poetry, I will never do it. So I have decided to write prose. Whereupon she wrote prose quite as successfully as she wrote poetry. So yeah, nobody will have heard of me. I tell people when I got the nomination I wrote this novel and got nominated for one of Canada's big prizes, which is Rogers Writers Trust. I started telling people I had moved from absolute, what is it called? Absolute obscurity to relative obscurity. So relatively obscure. After 80 years to be, or almost 80 years to be relatively obscure, well, I don't know. Depends on your point of view. Could be a great accomplishment or really a very poor comment on who I am, but never mind. That I think is enough of me for the moment.
All right, well, thank you. That was quite fascinating. I'm sure there is much more in there that we would love to learn about. Hopefully some of that will come out as we move into the questions and start sort of talking more about poetry and whatnot. And I just want to let you know that this is a very informal call, which I'm sure you've sort of figured out by now. So we'll try and sort of keep it, I will try and keep you on track, but if you have something to add or you want to, add something into a conversation, just feel free to go whenever it sort of comes up. You don't need to have to wait for permission to speak. So on that note, why don't we get into some of our questions? I sent these to everyone ahead of time. We won't necessarily go through them in order, but we will sort of start and why don't we start at the beginning? So how did you determine the style of poetry that you would pursue? Which I find this quite interesting because all of you write very different types of poetry. And has that changed over the course of your career? So Christian, why don't you start?
Oh, well, every poet has an origin story about how they become a poet. I've always aspired to be a poet ever since I was 4 years old. I was taken to a shopping mall when I was 4 years old in Brampton, Ontario, by my mother, who wanted to introduce me to Santa Claus for the first time at Christmas. And I was told, of course, that if I walked up this beautiful 1960s Hollywood set with a throne and this genie sitting upon it, I could ask for anything I wanted with a reasonable expectation that I could get it. And I did not know what to ask for. But I will suggest to you that I was the kind of child that when sat on the knee of Santa Claus and in a moment of panic, when called upon to ask for something, I said, a typewriter. And Santa Claus tried to talk me out of this. And of course, I was Aspergerite enough to start throwing a temper tantrum that somebody would resist this, albeit completely impulsive request. But at the time, it seemed to me that who was he to tell me that I couldn't have it? And I didn't know what one was. However, my working class parents, to their credit, actually did purchase me one, a green plastic typewriter, which I received for my very first Christmas. And I used it when shown how to operate it. I used it promptly to proceed to type out the pages from my favorite book, a book I couldn't read, but I admired. It was my father's encyclopedia of machines called How Things Work. It was just a big, thick book. And again, somebody with my particular compulsive behavior would have regarded this object as very interesting. It had exploded diagrams of disparate machines with an explanation on the other page. And it just did that page after page, a picture with an explanation. And I found the diagrams fascinating as a child. I was pre-literate, I couldn't read, of course. But what I could do was look at the glyphs on the page of print, find the key, and then hit the key. And I did that sequentially. And I did that with a certain kind of rigorous discipline that, a highly immersed kid can summon, if they concentrate. And I would type out pages of text directly from this book and show them to my mother, claiming at the time that I was a writer and that I would grow up to become one. Now, the irony of that particular story is that I did, in fact, grow up to become an avant-garde poet who founded a poetry movement that eventually became famous for doing exactly that kind of task, sitting down and typing out letter by letter other people's work and then publishing it as their own. It was a trick that I would have, I suppose, mastered as a 4-year-old kid that became one of the founding technical principles of the School of Poetry I helped to initiate. And I think that when I was a young man trying to become a poet, I was, of course, trained to write lyrically about my feelings and experiences, and wasn't introduced, however, to the history of experimental practice, which doesn't emphasize that kind of behavior. And I discovered in the course of my early education that I was being trained to become the kind of poet I should be, rather than the kind of poet I could be. And I think that's also commonplace with poets too, that they end up discovering the moment in their careers where they become the poet they should be, rather than the one, where they could be, rather than the one that they should be. We're trained, of course, to be a certain kind of writer. We're informed about our histories. We're shown models. We're given instructions, and they don't always sit perfectly with who we actually are. And we discover, from those lessons, I suppose, how we can become who we could be, rather than the kind of person we should be. And that occurred to me when I was a young graduate student. I realized that I was trying to become a poet who was not interested in poetry because I had, important insights that I needed to communicate about my experience, but because I was really fascinated with the beautiful texture and sound and material characteristics of language, that I really enjoyed the features of work that would otherwise go ignored. And I decided that I would figure out how to explore that rather than the training that I'd otherwise received. I know that people go through variations of this, of course, right? They encounter their histories of literature and they don't reflect themselves within it. They see that there's an otherwise subterranean tradition that goes untaught. And they hope to learn that and become adept at it. They respond, of course, to the tools that they're given and adapt them to new functions, misusing them for nefarious purposes. I think that that's a really good feature of poetic apprenticeship, and certainly characterizes my experience. That's how I became the poet I am.
I find that fascinating. I mean, I'm a sci-fi thriller writer, so it's not different, but it is in many ways the same. It's about just writing the stories. I think, what was it? Sorry, the writer that you could be, right? I find that fascinating, and it takes, I think, a certain amount of maturity in your writing career to come to that point.
Well, I think one way that you can be the writer you could be is that probably all of the things that you've been told are weaknesses in your practices are the very things that you're supposed to figure out how to turn into strengths.
Huh.
Right? That, of course, if you misload a brush when painting at the easel and it drips, you've made a mistake, right? But the drip is, of course, a mistake that could be a technical affordance that requires some further exploration, such that you could become Jackson Pollock, right? I mean, there's a way in which, some sort of thing that would be a technical infelicity could be, refabricated, re-exploited to something and made meritorious. Again, I would probably tell my students the same sort of thing, that those parts of your work that are for which you're passionately invested in, but other people regard as weaknesses, I think that's often a sign that you're probably on the right track, in terms of figuring out who you really are.
Fascinating. Yeah. Tanis, do you have anything you want to add?
Yes, I mean, I think that's fascinating. Thanks for going first in launching that, Christian, because I think I became the poet that I could be. Wait a minute. I think I am mixing up could and should. I think I became the poet that people wanted me to be, and then I decided that I should be a different kind of poet. So
that's right. I think that's the lesson people typically have to learn in the course of their careers. Yeah.
And I think I taught it. I found it out actually through teaching. Because there I am teaching a new generation of poets, and I thought to myself, this is all good stuff, but I should take more risks with my own work. I should take the kinds of risks with my work that I'm asking them to do, and it's only fair to do. And I also thought, and then I started reading differently and offering them different texts, and I became dissatisfied with offering them things that, you know what, that they would understand, but I'm not sure. I thought understanding was starting to be overrated, and I was more interested in their experimentation and the chances they could take, and getting them to think for themselves more as a writer. And that sparked something in me too, that I thought, yeah, I should take more chances. I should do it differently. So so I would still say that I'm a poet of the lyric moment, but what I consider the lyric moment has changed, right? It's become much more political, much more centered in who has the right to speak and what is sayable. So yeah, does that change? Yeah, that's the second part of the question. You know, does it change from when you first started publishing? And I would say for me, it very much has.
Yeah, fascinating
Could
too.
you,
Then.
could you say how it's changed, Tanis? Like how
I would say, like in short, I would say I'm more interested in the political, right, and what it means, who gets to have words on the page and who gets to say them out loud, and these kinds of opportunities, which have been traditionally in Canada quite conservative, and we're just starting to see some changes really in the last, 5 to 10 years.
Yeah, I find it's fascinating that or that you learn so much from your students, right? I've heard that from teachers before, that a lot of what there's sort of a constant sort of exchange, that the teacher is learning much as the students, and it's amazing that you sort of let that happen as opposed to not just sort of trying to stay in your lane.
But teaching is a kind of vampiric relationship. I mean, in exchange
Totally.
for my fund of lore and knowledge, I expect to receive some vitality and rejuvenation of my own soul, right? And I hope, right, that I'm the winner in that exchange, right? Like, but I think it's a transactional relationship. You're supposed to learn as much from your students as they learn from you. I think otherwise you're probably not so good a teacher as you might wish.
Absolutely.
Well, because the students always want to know why something works the way it does, and that's a legitimate question. And if the person who's instructing doesn't know, they better go and find out.
Right? Or they withhold that information for fear that that by divulging the super secrets, right, of their eldritch magic, they will be I don't know, giving away secrets for free. I resent those kinds of teachers, in the academy, who are unwilling to be very forthcoming about what they know, for fear that they will somehow either cheapen what they know or give away unearned credit, right, to their young charges. I have been a bit dismayed by some teachers who are unwilling, I think, are very reticent to tell everything that they know about how to do what they do.
That could potentially be another question that we could look at in terms of, not necessarily tonight, just in terms of how the style of teaching has changed over time. But we're not going to talk about that right now, because Pamela, if you want to join in and give your thoughts on this.
I'm going to say something, because at one point in my life of many different things, I was a teacher trainer. And now I tell, because I haven't done that for a long time, but I tell people who are just going into the classroom that you should make the assumption that at least 3 people in the classroom, any classroom you're going into, probably know more about what you're going to teach them than you know. And you're stupid if you don't regard your students as resources. They're the best people to teach each other and to teach you. I mean, I'm doing a little tiny jury now, and there's a guy, I know he's a guy because he is inadvertently identified himself, not by name, but by saying that he developed a computer game. So he's got this poem, and the poem is educating me about all the things that you need to know, all them things that me at my age certainly not going to know between now and when me dead. But it's amazing, because I'm going to the computer to look up, what all of these acronyms mean, and so on and so forth. I don't think most of us here probably, unless you know how to develop a computer game and keep it going over 9 years, and presumably, in each new generation devise a whole new, but it's amazing. I think fantastic. Here is this guy. He's teaching me in one little poem, and I am sitting here to jury whether he gets his prize or not. Fantastic. But he's absolutely teaching me a whole pile of stuff. Okay, nobody ever taught us until I came to Canada and did 2 humble correspondence courses, at which point I had already published 2 books. But, being a good teacher person, I know that I will never, ever not benefit from somebody teaching me something new. And I had DM Thomas as the person that I worked with for 2 years, and he was really very good, you know. I started out at our high school. It's interesting because Olive Senior has this poem called Colonial Girls' School. It's quite famous. Give the nuns their due. I grew up in a colony at the time when colonies were really colonies, right? 1942 was when I was born. 1962 is when Jamaica becomes independent. But the school I went to was one of the first places in the island where Indigenous theater began. So the nuns were writing, you know, stuff about when the British had been in Jamaica for 300 years. The headmistress wrote a pageant about the whole history of Jamaica, right? And I played the prime minister. We were not, I never studied English history. I must be the only person in the Caribbean who never we chose, and I did not choose English history. So I learned, what is it? When did William the Conqueror come? 10 something or the other, 1062, 1042. Mm. I learned that as an adult, an old adult. So I was saved that oppression. I don't know the kings. I don't know the queens. I don't know any of that. Thank God. I don't think I've suffered in my life from not knowing that. So we had a school paper, and we had a school magazine, and you got to write poetry, prose, anything. And I wrote this poem, and it's in very traditional style. Christian has this lovely term in his E section of Eunoia, something about new verse. What is it, Christian? Help me here. People who don't like new verse, you call them an ugly name. Right? Anyway,
give me a second, I'll find it out.
I'm writing this poem, but I do something naughty. Apparently, I don't think I was doing anything naughty. It was in Tanis's mode, using the poem to do something a poem is not supposed to do. And I was taking on I think the class prefects and sort of defending and introducing conversation, dialogue into this thing. And then I eventually learned after the fact that one of the teachers thought that the teachers were being talked about, great, and was very upset because I wasn't saying nice things about the prefects at all. So applied to the teachers, well. Anyway, so I don't know. I'm always doing something that is different from the time before. The one thing I would say, like, I do use traditional forms, but usually to subvert them. Like my collection of sonnets is called Subversive Sonnets. And hopefully it's now not Petrarchan, not Shakespearean, none of that. It's Pam's version of the sonnets. It's the Mordecai sonnets. And they set out to be subversive in the content as well as what I'm doing with the form. Also, people say you're always doing something new, something new. The one thing I think, or the two things, or maybe the three things. One is increasingly, I am overt about my Creole intentions. The Jamaican language is driving the stuff. Even if it seems like English, the Creole is doing its thing there. Look for it, it's there. Also, I'm interested, I don't think we're that far apart, actually. Even the three of us, I'd say. I'm interested in the noise, in what a Caribbean critic calls the word inaudible motion. I'm not interested in poetry that's dead on the page. I'm sorry, I just really am not, right? I think that, and I go into the classroom, or when I used to, and I would see, you know, it's one of those, what's that class that you have towards the end of high school in Canada, where you get to writer's craft. I'd go into a writer's craft class, and somebody would stand up to read a poem, and they're reading and you can barely hear them. And I'm saying, you have a voice. This is the most important thing. Say your thing, right? You know, you alone have that voice. Nobody else has that voice, just you, right? So I'm interested in the noise. I'm interested in rhyme and rhythm, but usually to mess with them, because the Creole is messing with them. So the Creole messing with the traditional forms, messing with the PR for the selected calls me rebellious. So I'll say, yes, absolutely. I just want to mess with stuff, you know? That's
Well, and that brings me to an interesting question. I don't know if anyone who wants to respond to this in terms of, is that sort of messing with stuff, as you say, sort of part of your processes? Is that integral to how you create poetry? I mean, in order to have stuff, as you say, alive on the page. Anybody can answer.
Yeah, I think it's the job of human beings to tamper with everything, including language. I think that's why we're here, is pretty much to stick screwdrivers in electric sockets. I mean, that's typically what we seem to be doing. No, I'm just saying that's what I think we typically do, is supposed to investigate this crazy, weird place we're in and figure out how to make it work. And poets have been, charged, I think, with showing up at Area 51 to examine this alien technology from outer space called language and figure out how to reverse engineer it to turn it into little anti-grav machines that make us all float. It's what we're kind of up to is you're messing with things you don't understand very well and trying to figure out how to make them do things that you don't know how to do. I mean, every poet is trying to say something better than they could say it otherwise, right? With very limited resources, right? I know if you're a blind person and you want to know what the color red is, somebody might put a hot coal in your hand, right? And the poet is somebody who's putting the hot coal in your hand. When you're a blind person that doesn't know what the color red is, I think that's what we're up to. If William Blake is trying to describe a tiger, he doesn't tell you what a tiger is or looks like or anything. I mean, it's not a zoological depiction of a tiger, right? It's something he shows you language behaving in a manner which is tigerish, which feels as seductive and as predatory as a tiger. It's kind of evoking, trying to transform language into not representing something, but actually becoming something. Language is doing the very thing, it's supposedly about, right? It's trying to become the thing that it's supposedly showing you. That's a weird job to have. Let me tell you, I think it's a very weird job to be a poet for that reason. It's not especially in demand, but I think that's one of the things we're kind of here to do, is reverse engineer language and transform it from an alien technology into a human technology.
I think no one writes poetry in order to sound the same as anyone else. I mean, we write poetry.
If they're the graduate, though, of an Iowa workshop creative writing program, maybe okay, I'm just saying that there is an impulse, right, to sound like everybody else. Okay.
Thank you so much for saying it.
No, I mean, like I wish that were true, Tanis, but that I would say you've expressed an ideal. Okay.
Okay, I don't write it so I can sound like other people. And I'm thinking too of my students who say, I have this thing I want to say, and I'm just working at try to get at it. And the thing is, they're dissatisfied with how they've been taught to write it. And I think, well, why don't we write it upside down? Why don't we write it backwards? Why don't we do this? Why don't we do that? Sure. And a question that they ask me almost all the time is, can you do that? And I'm like, see, there's no poetry police. No one's going to break in here and say you're doing it wrong.
I'll disagree with you on that point too. There's lots of poetry police, and I have been pulled over many times by them. But I will just simply say that.
Okay, then I'll revise.
Again, that's an aspirational ideal. That poetry is.
I say I'm not the poetry police, right? I say I'm not the poetry police, and there's things to be found out by doing it differently, right? And that's the whole point of poetry. It's supposed to be a different kind of language. It's not supposed to do exactly what prose does, right? And so part of me knows that I see young writers wanting that difference, but also sometimes not being able to name what that difference is, right? So that's what I'll say about that.
Yeah,
those are good points. The job of the poet is to give permission, right?
Yes.
To figure out how to say what you need to say. Honestly, I think it's a very good definition of poetry. I mean, all the definitions of poetry are right, in my opinion, but that's a really good one. Is that poetry gives you the permission to figure out how to say what you want to say.
Yeah. Well, that brings me sort of to a question on craft of poetry in terms of, are the essential, this is not on our list, my apologies, but are the essential tools that you're using as a poet, have those changed, or are there sort of fundamental tools that you work with and play with to sort of create stuff, or does this new kind of way of looking, or the way that you're looking at your work, does it require different tools? Does that make sense? I don't know, Tanis.
I will suggest that
Okay, go ahead.
whatever the kind of poem you're looking at, no matter what form it takes, no matter what genre, style, or period, there are things that they all have in common that characterize their aptitudes. That there are, in fact, technical proficiencies that are common to all kinds of poetry across all periods of history. And that in fact, what is a bit dismaying to students, and I suspect to other poets, is that they're actually very easy things to learn. Very straightforward things that if you just always put them into practice, no matter what kind of poet you are, if you always put these small handful of rules into practice, they always work. And rather than have to discover these features of good writing over and over again, relearning how to invent the wheel over and over again, the job of a creative writing class, you hope, is to give you a pretty quick path to those sets of otherwise really useful tools and technical aptitudes, most of which do not require much genius to apply. They really are mechanical and automated forms of technical proficiency. Then once you've acquired this relatively easy set of skills, it's possible, I think, to amplify them by then bringing to bear your own stupidity and weirdness and creativity and oddness to bear upon them. And it's just that students aren't given many opportunities to understand what constitutes the method for bringing the weirdness to the table. They just don't understand that, oh, actually you got permission to do all kinds of crazy things, even when people are telling you not to do it. I think that's what I would just, there's a lot of really very good technical aptitudes that are straightforward and are old. They're just really proven over thousands of years of writing now. There's no need to relearn all of this stuff. You could just say, do this, and you'll be quickly good.
I think the technology that I'd like to invoke here is the deadline. It is very useful in a classroom. It is useful in a writing group that like the one that Pam and I are in, and of course it's useful for handing in a manuscript. So lots of people want to write things, but again, yes, you give them permission, and the deadline is very, very important. Not only am I giving you permission to write a sonnet upside down, I'm also telling you that it's due in 10 days. So go, right? Go. And I feel like I say that more often than anything in my class. Go now and do it. Go now and do it. And they will say, but what about this? But what about that? I said, why don't you try it? And then if you still have questions, you can come back and we'll talk about it. But I want you to try it first. And I think that's how we limit people, is we say, you must obey every rule. And Christian, I think you're right. The set of things that you need to know are simple, and you can get that from a textbook. But when you get it from a textbook, it doesn't feel urgent because you don't have to produce a poem according to those rules in 10 days.
Students
right?
actually don't believe the rules. I show them stuff and say, look, here's how easy it is to fix a problem. And they won't believe me. They would just say that this is that applying it, I'm not going to do that. And I'd say, look, I really am I'm not being parental here. This is not a curfew. Really, this thing always works. And you'll understand that every good writer, no matter what kind of writing they do, simply do this. And it just, as a matter of happenstance. I mean, in response to the deadline, I have students who will say something like, can I do something? And I'm saying, look, it's a creative writing class. I don't know. Hand it in. Let's find out. That would be my, right. That would be my, they're annoyed that I haven't given them much guidance to say, look, I want you to do this. I want you to follow this rule. And they're saying, can I do this? I'm going to shrug my shoulders. I don't know, but hand it in. Let's find out. And there's no notion, I think, that they have an opportunity to be playful. They haven't been given many opportunities, or actually just to sit in a sandbox and experiment with the materials that they've got in front of them, right? To make something, MacGyver something out of whatever, handful of things they've got at hand. To me, that's kind of what a poet is. It's because you make the best poem you can out of what you got at hand.
Well, that sort of segues nicely actually into one of our questions. And I know, Pamela, maybe you want to start by addressing this. And what are sort of the best strategies for improving your poetry, for learning your craft?
Well, everybody will say, well, read lots of poems, write lots of poems. I would say listen to your poems because, you know, like, and listen to crazy people like Clifton Joseph and Christian Bok and the foolishness they do with poetry. Because actually I was thinking when I was listening to Christian do one of his song poems, right? Where, you know, language that we recognize introduces itself every now and then, but by and large, he's just making a whole lot of noise. And I was thinking that in Jamaican Creole, you can have an entire conversation without using a single word. Like,
yeah, that's amazing.
And so on and so on. And you can have a conversation. It's two people and they're saying these things and they're saying stuff. But what they're doing is using noise, you know, noise that is not, doesn't have, you can't go to the dictionary and find out what it means. For one thing, the same set of sounds in a different set of contexts will have a different meaning. I'm not really sure what else I would say to somebody. I think, oh, show your stuff to people who don't like you, right? But you show it to people who like you, they're going to tell you all kinds of, listen to me, this mashed up a friendship between my husband and a very good friend of his, because a good friend of his brought a manuscript and said, you know, this is my, I think it was a lady friend, and he gave it to our press. Well, the press did not publish it because it was manifest, not nonsense, but it was very bad. And the gentleman in question cut my husband for years because, but it's you know, like, I think that Carol will witness, when I write something, I just finished the book of Joseph, maybe 10 people read it for me. And I absolutely think that people save me from myself all the time, right? Not necessarily in terms of craft, but, you know, like, I had Joseph's uncle making a rocking chair, and somebody said they sat on the floor in Jesus's time, on the floor. And then I had to make a decision. Was I going to introduce the rocking chair or not? Well, of course, the rocking chair is in the book, but then there's a note that says, I, Pam, am aware that people did not sit in chairs, they sat on the ground, right? But it's, I think that's somebody who respectfully reads your work and will tell you absolutely. That's why you're in a writing group, you know, because people will say, well, try this, you know, that might work better. Or really and truly, there's a lovely Surinamese poet named Robin Dubru, who is probably absolutely obscure, but a great poet. And he had a poem about giving things to the wastebasket, because some of them, that's where they belong. Some poems, the wastebasket. So I would say also learn, try hard to develop the sense of when you have a poem that deserves the wastebasket. Do not think that you are the new Derek Walcott. Do not think you are the new Cecil Milosh. Just say, this is Pam writing a poem, and often, Pam, the poem deserves the wastebasket. And if you're an apprentice poet, more and more, or you must be more and more ready to say this, the wastebasket is where this one deserves to go. That is the publisher, and that is that's all I have to say. I don't know. I'm happy to hear what Christian and Tanis would say about, you know, how to develop the craft.
I mean, it's true that, you know, developing your taste is part of it, and developing like an idea of what you actually want to do. But I don't think that's an afternoon ill spent to write something that doesn't work and to find out that it doesn't work, and you check it out and you start again on the idea in another couple of days. And that's a piece of learning.
No, that's not what I'm saying at all.
Oh, sorry.
No. I'm not saying it's wasted. I'm just saying, because I have spent lots and lots and lots of time working on something and deciding at the end of that process, no, this cannot live. This deserves to die, right? And none of that time is wasted, because you've learned stuff in the process of getting to the point where you say, this cannot live, right? All the things you've learned will feed into something else that will have life. But, you know, I think that to romanticize how good you are, I don't know if, Christian, does everything that you write turn out to be something you can use?
No, of course not. Most of the time, it does not turn out to be, a work of heartbreaking genius. But I make sure that if it does go out into the world, I'm proud enough to imagine that it does. Right? I have to imagine that it's very good. I'm generally pretty pleased with everything that's out in the world. Even my earliest stuff, I'm not embarrassed about it. But I don't know. I had some very good mentorship and training about how to winnow and edit and be ruthless in response to my own practice. And I teach my students as what I think are just very straightforward rules for assessing the merits of something for mechanical reasons, absolutely, utterly mechanical stuff.
Christian, when you say mechanical, what do you exactly mean?
What do I mean? Like you don't have to think. Like you don't have to think when you're assessing it. It doesn't require much genius to know when you're doing something right. For example, my favorite definition of poetry is by Samuel Taylor Coleridge, who said a poem is the best words in the best order. And what I like about that definition is that it just implies that all you do as a poet is something akin to permutations and combinations, right? You pick the best words, and whatever they are, and you put them in the right order. Right? It's just language is now something that's just random permutations and combinations that are determined by a certain judgment of taste. And in the modern version of this is, making music is simply sampling and remixing, right? You choose a sample, put it into a remix. I think that that's what poets are typically doing, is using words as a medium for unusual and interesting combinations. And it's possible to assess what are the best words. And students are a little doubtful, but I could say there are 4 parts of speech. So let's look at the parts of speech and assess what are the best words. And in the case of nouns, there are rules about what are the best nouns. If I were to give you a noun phrase like the forest of evil, and then ask you to perform a little Sophie's choice and ask which of these 2 nouns is better, which one is the better noun, forest or evil? I think a poet would come up pretty quickly with a credible answer, but it's fun to indulge in some Socratic dialogue with the students as they assess which of those 2 words they would prefer to eliminate. And initially, I think that there's a lot of favoritism that they would prefer to keep the word like evil, because that's a more powerful word. It's got a great, more thematic profundity to them, and they think it's a more interesting word for that reason. And I would say, no, the assessment in the history of literature is that no, you would actually prefer to keep the word forest. In part because the forest is something that you can actually look at tangibly. It has empirical characteristics that appeal to the senses. And if you want to induce an emotion in a person, you should talk about real things, right? There are no ideas but in things, right? By showing, actual, tangible, concrete, sensorial experiences, you induce an emotional reaction. The human brain is not predisposed to think about ideas. The word evil is an abstraction. If you were to go through a poem and replace every abstract noun with a concrete noun, the poem is improved. So if I were to say the phrase, the forest of evil, and replace it with a concrete noun at random, it gets better. The forest of glass, the forest of razors, the forest of chandeliers. Those are better noun phrases, aren't they? Right? And all I've done is just simply go through my poem and replace every idea word, every abstract noun, with a concrete noun, something tangible that appeals to at least one of the 5 senses. And again, that's a good premise. So what we know from the history of literature, we go back and look and say, oh, well, Shakespeare really doesn't talk about love. He talks about, sighs and roses and summer days, right? I mean, he talks about things, typically, right? That if you look at your favorite poets, almost certainly they write about real, concrete, tangible stuff. And that the idea that arises out of it is a happy side effect. Now, in that phrase, the forest of chandeliers, again, I could ask you a kind of Sophie's choice, which of those 2 words is better, right? And, which one would you pick? And that becomes an interesting Socratic dialogue with the students as they try to figure out which of those 2 words is really the preferable one. I think, many of them eventually decide they'll throw overboard the word forest and keep the word chandeliers, which I think, given literary history is the correct choice. But why is the word forest, less preferable? And it's just because of all the nouns, it's a more generalized class of things than the word chandeliers, which is a more specific class of things. If you replace every generalized noun in your poem with a more specific noun, the poem gets better, right? If I replace forest with the rainforest of chandeliers or the woodland of chandeliers, All of a sudden now we're getting into, terrain that's a little more interesting. I mean, students will write phrases like the man walked his dog down the street, and man, dog, street, those are all concrete nouns, but they don't evoke a world because they're generalized nouns. If you make those nouns specific, right? The undertaker walked his Doberman down the boulevard. All of a sudden now you've evoked a world. So you know that, hey, if you're a poet writing poems, pick concrete nouns over abstract nouns. And when you pick a concrete noun, pick a more specific noun than a general noun. And your poem will be improved without you thinking about it. Like it's just perforce, it happens, it gets better. To me, that kind of lesson is the thing a creative writing class should teach every student. Like that would be one little thing. I just say like, this always works. I know you're doubtful, you're skeptical, but it's only because you haven't actually put it into practice. But go through every one of your terrible poems, every terrible poem you've got, and just replace every abstract noun with a concrete noun at random. Like I'm just like, that's how powerful this technique is, at random, and the thing will get better. And then replace every noun that's generalized with one that's more specific, and it gets better. To me, if you can teach somebody something as simple as that, you've improved their lives immensely. And you can do that with every part of speech. There's these rules that just apply to each one of those technical aptitudes. This would be what I would be telling students, is that how to immediately improve your work. I don't know, follow these handy hints here about what are the best words, and they always work. Just try, they always work.
Tanis, did you want to add anything to that, or did you already speak?
I've lost track of when I've spoken, when I haven't. But I will say, just on the tail of what Christian said, that I think it's this idea of choice that is really important. Suggesting that a way to improve is both simple, but it does mean taking control of it and saying, I'm going to do this. I'm going to make this choice right here. I'm going to make this choice right here. And so all of a sudden it becomes deliberate, as opposed to, a kind of thing that people are afraid to touch or afraid to work with, that's supposed to come out whole. So that Coleridge, best words in the best order, the idea that there is a best, right, in both instances, in word choice and in the order that they go in, is, I think, a revelation to many people when they first start writing poetry.
I think the idea of deliberation, as you've pointed, is very important, because I assume when they show me the little phrase, I've said, you've tried out every other permutation and combination. And right. You've said, right, of all of the, the slot machine, options I got, these were 3 cherries. And I'm like, I think you could have done better here, because there's a better choice, right? There's a choice that could have very easily, just by one little tweak, improved this immensely. And I would wonder why it wouldn't have occurred to you to use that choice instead of this one, right? When confronted with it. I assume that somehow, like you've cycled through the entire library of Babel, and you've lit upon this particular text, right? And you've said, that's the best one. And you pluck that off. You say, I'm going to sign that one. I'm taking credit for it, right? Yeah. I think that's what's going on. There's a deliberate notion that you have the power to make a choice over what constitutes the best permutation of the words in your head.
Yeah. You have the power. You, poet or aspiring poet, have the power.
Yes.
You hope so.
Yes. Right. Yeah, and you're making the choices, you're making the deliberations, right? As opposed to waiting for me to tell you how to improve it.
Or your professor at the University of Iowa to tell you.
Yeah, that's right. And this is how
we're saying these things about Iowa, please, guys.
It's all right. You're not hurting my feelings. But yeah, I haven't been. No. That's why I say you're not hurting my feelings. But yeah, I think all kinds of things proceed from those kinds of choices that people feel now that they're more in charge of the poem, they can do more with it. Christian's camera's off, but I think he's still there.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. I do have a sort of a follow-up question on that. Does there come a point where certain poets need to be told to stop? Because can you get into an infinite sort of loop of trying to make it perfect?
Oh.
Oh no, but there's a rule. There's a rule that it's never perfect, isn't there?
Right. Yeah.
That's a rule. I mean, even if you get to 90 points, it's the thing about walking across the room that you can never reach the other side because you're always halfway between there and where you're going, right?
Mhm.
Yeah. And again, deadlines. The poem's not finished, but the deadline looms, and so you hand in the version of it that you have, right? Or you learn to hand in the version of it that you have. And admittedly, some deadlines are longer than others. We have Christian working on his project for 20 years, and you know, and sometimes, yeah, it really is that the student or the beginning writer knows that they have to write something to show to their group mates next week, right? So that's a deadline too. But being motivated to produce because there's a time limit, and of course, death is our ultimate time limit. What do you want to write before you cannot write anymore? You know, that's not to bring everyone down, but I think there's lots of people who are motivated to say, I haven't yet written, you know, this work that I've been striving towards. And yeah, so that's a great deadline. You can quote me.
I love that. I love that one, actually. So much,
Yeah.
all of this just applies to prose as well. I mean, it's so much of it is just applicable to any kind of writing. I do want to take a step in a sort of a different direction now, and it's very relevant to sort of what we were talking about at the very beginning of the call, even before we started recording. But how do you find the space to create, and has it sort of, especially in our current world situation, and has it become more recently? Has it become more difficult recently? And do you have to purposely create that space? I don't know who wants to start. Pamela, do you want to start?
Sure. I am not a great poet. I will never be a great poet. This is because I do not get up at 4 o'clock in the morning like Derek Walcott and sit in front of my computer or typewriter for 4 hours and wait on the muse. And even if the muse does not come, I will know that I have sat for the 4 hours. I don't ever do that. I have never done that. I'm not supposed to have published 9 books of poetry and whatever else I've managed to write in my life, a novel, whatever, because I don't do that. I respond to Tanis's kind of deadlines, and when I hit them, I'll go like 24 hours a day, 24/7 until I've done it, right? It's not quite as bad as that, but I am not an organized person. And if I were ever to have listened to all the people who said, you have to sit down in front of the computer for the 4 hours, get up, have your breakfast, have your cup of coffee beside you, sit down there, I would never have written anything, right? I cannot say that the pandemic has created a situation in which I produce more, largely because I have had a competition. I have, first of all, been caregiver for somebody who was dying. Then I have watched the person die and managed his care from across the road. And then I have mourned, right? That is why I was able to say happily, I had projects with deadlines because they tie you. And when I was an editor of an academic journal and people who had never written anything came to me and said, academics, I mean, how am I going to get the first thing written? I would say, make an agreement with somebody, write it with somebody. Because if I agree with somebody, then I'm going to turn up. If I am just doing it by myself, I don't turn up, right? That having been said, when the taxpayers give you money and you have to produce a report, I mean, the taxpayers of Canada have been so responsible for my productivity. I got to tell you, right? Because I don't take people money and don't feel obliged to produce the thing, right? I take it and I work on it, and sometimes it takes me longer. And I say, I'm very sorry, Mr. OAC, but my husband died, so this project didn't finish, but I'm keeping on going. At the end of having written Red Jacket, is supposed to be a little joke, but my little jokes don't always turn out to be little jokes. I had worked on Red Jacket, I think, for maybe over 12 years. And finally, I had started somewhere around 60, I think. Finally, it was published in 1972. Nobody's taking into account the whole business of finding the damn publisher and getting the damn book published. So I am what is it, 7 number, Septuagenarian, that number, right? And this is what is being written in the little kitchen of paper. Look at this old lady who produced this book. Well, the old lady had been producing the book for a very long time, you know. So the whole thing of time is something else, right? I had wanted to say on the subject of the poems, that there's a children's poem that I had the first 5 lines for months, right? Before the rest of it came. I think it's a great little children's poem. And I'll tell you the first 5 lines. Whenever her mother said, don't, Jemima said, mother, I won't, but she did. And so I waited for months for Jemima to tell me what it was that she did. It's a great little poem about how Jemima would stand on her head in the wrong places and do all the impossible things. But I waited for that, which is something else I think you have to learn, that the thing is talking to you. It has a mind of its own. You will bring it into being, but in a way you have to listen to what you are writing as well, because there's that nice little dynamic that happens between the potter and the clay, where the clay is working over the potter at the same time as the potter uses his craft to produce the clay. I don't know if any of that made any sense. I'll shut up now.
No, it did, absolutely. Tanis or Christian, who wants to jump in?
I don't think I can add anything to what Pamela said. I'm going to let her remarks stand.
Thank you, Tanis. The old lady feels like, you know, being almost 80 comes to something. Come on, Christian, you have to say something.
Who am I to tell other people how they should be creative? What constitutes the ways in which they can sculpt out time. Everybody has an immense amount of commitment and duress under which they write. Everybody is fighting a battle that nobody else knows about. Every one of us is trying to figure out how to be who we are in a manner which is challenging and extraordinarily difficult. When people look, I suppose, with envy upon the productivity of others and are worried, I would say you really just have to worry about your own garden here. You have to figure out how to be able to weed it and plant it and work on it to the exclusion of everybody else's output and productivity. I've worked now for 20 years on a project every day with a certain amount of rigor and discipline. I spend at least an hour every day. It's not always the same hour, but it's an hour every day trying to push forward a Sisyphean rock up a hill, and with a deliberation and an intent to complete the project, not knowing that in fact can be done. That's a very discouraging and difficult task to undertake. Had I known just how hard the project I'm working on would be, I probably wouldn't have embarked upon it with such alacrity, with such a sense of hubris at the start. I'm, humbled by the effort that I think people have to exert in order to become successful. I think when I see the success of others and it's impugned, I look, see the success of other people, and when I see that it's impugned, I understand that the people who are impugning it don't understand what success is. They've never had it. They don't understand the exertion required to get it. They don't know what kinds of sacrifices people have made. They really just do not understand it. And I think that you have to give yourself a bit of permission to figure out how to be creative under your own circumstances, against your own challenges and difficulties. I might suggest to you that it's probably impossible to become productive if you actually don't show up at the gym, right? I mean, if you don't show up with a certain kind of rigor and deliberation, every day. But let's put it this way: you should show up to the gym every day, but make sure you do at least one push-up. Like it doesn't have to be 100 push-ups, right? It just has to be one. As my friend Kenneth Goldsmith has noted, you just have to work on something a little bit at a time, and eventually it becomes something magnificent. A small exertion of effort created every day, exerted every day, exerted with some rigor, and it could be small. It's just a small amount of effort, but it's done with deliberation and recurrence, eventually results into something magnificent. It always does. A single drop of water can wear away a mountain, right? I mean, it really does work. He and I have seen this kind of behavior amongst our fellow artists and in our own practice, work on something a little bit every day, and eventually it becomes something gigantic. Find the time. It's a small amount of time. Write one sentence every day. Write your paragraph every day. A single page every day. But whatever you do a little bit every day, right? With some recurrence. Go to the gym, but just do one push-up. If you do that, you're already making your life better. And you should do it anyway, because look, the time's going to be spent, right? You know, whether you fulfill your dream or not, it's gonna pass anyway, right? So you should exert yourself to what degree you can. Push the pebble up the hill as far as you can.
Well, dissenting opinion, Christian. I mean, what I like to think is happening is that you're like Jemima was sitting inside of me. Okay, maybe a better way to say it is, I had a fight with Dennis Scott once. Yeah, I don't know if you know Dennis Scott. Is brilliant in so many different ways, and an amazing poet and dramatist and actor. Used guest places on the Cosby Show, which some people will not know. But the first was the importance of lineation in a poem. And he was insisting that it was terribly important. And I was saying, well, and I said, you know what happened, Dennis? Sometimes I write a whole poem in my head before it ever touches the page. And while I'm writing it in my head, it's not lineated, right? The lineation must come when I set it down. So I would be lying, Christian, and I'm too old to lie, if I said that I did a push-up every day. But I think that
most people don't. I mean, I recognize that most people don't.
No, but I think maybe the push-up is at this stage of my life. It's happening, right? It's I don't have to put my pen to the paper. I do not have to. I do not even have to make the line. It is just happening. I'm old enough that I claim that, right?
Right.
And I claim it for my prose as well as for the poetry. Because like what I'm working on now is a collection of short stories. And I am writing my story even as I speak with you. Some of what you've said this evening will probably influence a story somewhere or other, right? And some of what I hope we're going to talk about, because there was a question Colleen sent us that had to do with play, right?
Yes.
Had to do with play. Okay. And I know I've listened to Christian speak about that. Speak about humor, speak about the fact that being an avant-garde poet had to do with, sort of ripping apart this whole business of the terrible seriousness of the poetic calling.
Yeah, I mean, I wish poetry was more fun. Right now, lately, it hasn't seemed like it's a lot of fun for people. Right? Like it's, and I'm still this holdout. Like, no, where's the whimsy? Where's the play? Surely people should just be doing things because they're investigative and they're speculative, right? That we're little wolf pups, growling at each other and just goofing off. Like there's the notion that poetry can't goof off, right? That it can't, that it can't perpetrate welfare fraud upon us. Like that's what I think it is. It's kind of it's language on vacation. So in these occasions when people saying, there's a discipline required to work, deadlines, stuff like that, I mean, part of me understands that, maybe people can't, behave unless they're watched, right? I mean, like maybe that's true. Like maybe you can't do your thing unless somebody's actually, threatening you with a punishment if you don't, right? I'm still the kind of guy who would be like, honestly, I would prefer not to have the surveillance and would just like to be able to play, to be given the opportunity just to goof off and not be vilified for it. Like that's the thing that I find really hard right now as a poet, is that my naysayers outnumber my yes people by I think orders of magnitude. My naysayers, and they're one of the complaints would just be that the work is indulgent and insignificant because it doesn't do anything that constitutes work. Like it's not doing a job. And I'm like, I would just say poetry's job is effectively to be what it is, whatever is to strive to be whatever it could be, right? Like whatever that might be.
The current project, is that it, Christian?
I mean, that project, the Xenotext polarizes opinion in the world of poetry, and I would suggest that it's very polarized. That people either regard it as a work of grandiose genius, which I think is the correct attitude. Let me suggest, but or they think it's a terrible imposition upon poetry that is in fact an indulgence that has no merit because it's not serving a utilitarian purpose that is actually something they can get behind. And I shrug my shoulders on the one hand. I would just say, look, poets are supposed to be doing things that are useless, I suppose, with language, right? That there's a playfulness to poetry that aspires simply to be beautiful, and beautiful things. I mean, they have a right to exist just because they're really magnificent, like regardless of what their message might be, or regardless of what they're doing. And even the things that we regard as inimical in the world, I don't know, a shark or a man-eating tiger, like the things that people would want to go out and destroy. I'd say no, they have kind of have a right to just try to figure out what they are going to become, what they are. And poetry's like that. I always think that poetry should enjoy some kind of game preserve in the world of language. That it should be just allowed to figure out how to become what it is in its own natural environment, right? And it's right now, it's not allowed to figure out what it can become in its own natural environment, right? Like I think that there's a worrisome necessity for it to be things that it may not be so conducive to becoming. Like,
but you try that, Christian. I'm stopping you.
Yeah.
Tell me.
What? Tell you what?
What do you mean by people or the whole business of preventing?
That a poem can't be allowed just to be a poem, right? That there's no the notion of art for its own sake. The autotelic characteristics of art are less appreciated now. Those occasions where the job of the poem is in fact to promote a cause or stake a claim or speak a message or amount to a kind of public service announcement, all the various functions for which it can be, like, I'm not dismissing the fact that they can do that.
Those poems can do that, but
yeah, right. Like of course, poems can be recruited to do anything legitimately. I'm not just shrug my shoulders, say they're allowed to do whatever they're allowed to do. Like it's just the occasions when you see, oh, like poems are not allowed to do stuff, and I'd be like, well, what are poems not allowed to do that wouldn't be an investigative feature of linguistic experimentation? The playfulness of it, right, like is now something that the avant-garde has, I think, greeted with suspicion, whereas it used to be something that we would appreciate. A poet like B.P. Nicol, to me, who was somebody very important to my own practice, published a poem, a beautiful poem, something that I regard as an amazing thing. He published a little party balloon, cartoon party balloon, upon which he had imprinted the word thought with the letters UGH bracketed. And he's respelled the word, always spelled the word thought with the letters UGH bracketed. And he said that this was his definition of a poem. He wanted a poem, in effect, to be a thought in which the ugh of thought was removed. That the job of a poem was to remove the painfulness of thought, the ugh from thought, to leave behind the phonically pure thought, the THOT, that kind of euphonically perfect thought that was free from this, this little elegiac pain, that ugh that's embedded in it. We should bracket it. I mean, it's there, but it's held in suspension. And he published that word inside a little cartoon thought balloon on a party, birthday balloon. The job of the poet was then to inflate this balloon, blow it up, tie it off, and then you would insert it into a headband that came with the book, right? So you would have above your head now this very deliberate kind of literalized version of a thought balloon with the word thought projecting above your head. And to complete the reading of the book, you would then pull out a little envelope that contained a thought suppressant that consisted of a hat pin that we then use to pop the balloon. And of course, by doing so, you destroyed the book in the act of reading it, and you perform the experience of a poet having an epiphanic thought, right? You have this remarkable thought, this wonderful, whimsical, playful experience, right? This ludicrous little thing where you're wandering around the party with a little party balloon above your head with the word thought in a cartoon thought bubble. But it's ephemeral. It disappears, right? You destroy it and it's lost. And that's a wonderful experience in the world of poetry. It's a hard thing to imagine poets reproducing now. The people aren't that fun or that playful, that childish, right? That juvenile, that simple. There's the notion that poetry's ability to just to recuperate. I don't know if a 4-year-old kid at a green plastic typewriter, right, that was given to him by Santa Claus, is what poetry is kind of like. You know, that you're punching out words you can't, like something you can't even know how to read, right? You don't even know what it says. You don't even know what it means when you write it, right? That kind of moment of discovery in the act of writing, that you don't even know what it means. You still don't know what it means, even after you've written it. That job of poetry, right, is something that's, I think, less appreciated or harder to sell, at least to the public or to my peers. It's a little more difficult right these days, whereas it was the bread and butter of my youth.
Thank you. That's a wonderful answer. Tanis, do you want to, before I move on to the final question, did you want to add anything to Christian's thoughts on that? I guess we sort of moved into the question on play, and
yeah, I would say we've gone over the territory of people being rather afraid to play because they think it's about rule obeying. So I will, I'll repeat that, and I will also say that's what keeps it a practice alive, play, right? And when you write something and you're jazzed, you're like, yes, you know, and I'm all excited. And even when that excitement goes away, when I come back to the either my notebook or the screen, and it looks like a mad person has written a whole bunch of lines, and I go, what? Who wrote this? I don't know what it means. I don't know where I was going with it. It still has the energy of that play, and that's exciting, right? That you can do these kinds of things with language. And I think when Christian was talking, I was remembering Erin Murray talking about writing something in the late 90s, and she said she wrote an entire poem out of the fact that her finger slipped off the keyboard, and she wrote a couple of the same letter like 3 times, like 3 B's or 3 A's. And she said, well, why shouldn't that be spelled with 3 B's? Let me try it. And she kept going, switching the letters around and thinking of things that we would say, well, that's just happenstance or a finger slip. And she said, yeah, but what if it's a language, right? And so now when I make mistakes on the page, I don't erase them right away. I keep them and look at them and think how that, and I think, well, maybe I'll keep it, maybe I won't, but I'm going to stop and think about what that mistake does to that word. Does it change the meaning?
Great story.
Does it change the look of it? Does the fact that the look of the word changes, does it make me think of the relationship of the other words in a different way? So, so I think we need, more permission to play, more permission to think differently about our own work.
Well, Erin's notion that the happenstance there should just be preserved, I think it's a great story. You should elaborate upon that. I would love to know more occasions when that's occurred in your own practice, Tanis. Like,
it's still fairly new for me.
So. And the paint is dripped.
I need to invoke the great fellow Griffin Prize winner, Pamela Brathwaite. Go and look at his stuff. If you don't know it, go look at it, because he is the quintessential person who does that stuff. And he does it absolutely deliberately, and he does it everywhere.
He's the wonderful poet who says that hurricanes don't speak in I ams. I mean, I think that's an amazing, right? I mean, like that to me is an edifying thing to say.
I got to tell you, Christian, the reason the subversive sonnets exist is because Pam said, "Come on, the hurricane can damn well roar as it wants to." And I wrote a whole book to demonstrate to him that the hurricane can roar as it wants to, in iambics, in pentameter. Yes, it can. Yes, it can. But he was a great breaker of rules. And I absolutely mean seriously that I took him on. I took that statement on. I've taken it on practically in everything that I've written, because I work in traditional thing all the time. The hurricane is the Creole, and it can do whatever it likes. It can work in traditional forms. It can work, free verse. The book of Joseph, ladies and gentlemen and ladies, please get a copy. Is a book about the father of Jesus. It's extremely funny. Carol can bear me out, and it is absolutely, badly behaved. It doesn't obey any. No traditional forms. I suppose you'd call it free verse. I don't know if it's that. It's all kind of things. It's a little play here and a little play there, as in, play, stage play. But that's the whole thing of the permission that you get to do what you want to do. And I think you give yourself more permission as you approach the grave, and I'm very close to it, so I have lots of permission.
All right, I'm going to try and get us back on track here. It's
I'm sorry for you. That's my fault entirely.
no, not at all. It's all great.
No, we're all at fault here, I think.
Yeah, no, and it's actually kind of fascinating because we've all sort of managed to cover most of the topics in the questions, even if we didn't actually officially get to the questions, which is great. But I do want to open it up to some of the people who are listening and whether or not they had any questions or not. You can just unmute your mic and ask your question.
And may I say thank you for attending the event live. I appreciate your willingness to be here, all of you. Thanks for being so gracious to join us.
Does anyone have any questions?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Hi. I just want to say thank you for this discussion because it's been wonderful and it's giving me many ideas. I'm a visual arts high school teacher and a lot of what you have said has resonated with me greatly. But especially this last conversation about people not wanting to play and the shall we say coding around that. I often get shall we say the weirdos of the of the high school world in my classes, and even amongst the various different arts, we tend to get a crowd that is different from, say, the traditional arts and things like that. And I find even when I have my senior classes and we're talking and discussing what type of art they want to make, what are the reasons for what they want to do, that I find myself gravitating towards the ones who just like to sit around and make memes. And it really seems to be the playfulness in my particular discipline that is still well and alive, that perhaps has been, I don't know, like sucked out of some of the other disciplines. And I think it does survive, but perhaps in other ways. And maybe it's that I see the technology side of things where this playfulness still occurs, like from message boards, from that kind of like odd area of the internet where people aren't necessarily supervised according to what they're putting out into the world. But I was wondering, kind of bouncing off of that, whether what you all think of perhaps these strange marriages of technology and wordplay as survive in memes and other things, but also in this strange pandemic age where we've been forced online for so many things, if that's going to have lasting impacts on the way we see language and on poetry. Is it going to find new vehicles? Is it going to find other ways to play that perhaps we haven't seen before?
Anybody want to jump in? Feel free to.
I would promptly jump in and just simply say that, yeah, obviously poetry might need to be more dank in the future. That's one avenue of exploration in the future. The mimetic world of technology might be an underappreciated chance for poetry to do something new. Certainly, we've seen a few attempts to engage with that milieu in the last 20 years. Flarf and conceptualism have both tried to respond with I think some intelligence to the new technological affordances of the internet and all of its distributed kind of parodic character. You're on the cusp now of a new affordance of the internet with the creation of the blockchain, which has a whole variety of disparate technical aptitudes that can contribute to poetry. What I see happening in the future is simply that poetry is not going to be what you think it is, and it's probably not going to be in the milieu of poetry. When I was a young man, we used to joke that poetry had left the building. It was like Elvis, right, that had left the concert and was, I don't know, in a Cadillac en route to Saturn. But everybody was still having a standing ovation in the arena, applauding the existence of poetry, even though it was happening elsewhere. It wasn't happening, in the auditorium anymore. It was happening someplace else. I think that may be true now, is that what we regard as the proper avenues for artistic expression may be happening in other regimes that are not immediately recognized as legitimate or have even larger audiences, right, than we would otherwise expect. I mean, the largest art sales in the world that have occurred are now NFT sales, and that strikes me as a bizarre transition in the art market, for example. And it's not something that's even mentioned in the media. The artist who sold the greatest, sold one object as the most expensive artwork, did so without receiving media attention in a milieu where it's an absolutely innovative technological affordance. That's a striking strangeness about our current, situation. I just say the poetry is going to get stranger. It's going to get weirder. In ways that are going to
Has anyone
stir
tried to mint a poem as an NFT? I'm curious.
Oh, absolutely. Thousands of people. There's an entire movement of people doing that, right? Me included. Absolutely. Poetry is already there. It's already there. I mean, it should be on the ground floor. I always think it should be on the ground floor of every new technological affordance. But it's not something that is immediately appreciated. The pace of change in the world of the arts, let alone society at large, is just very fast. I don't know. Your young charges in high school are probably doing the coolest thing already, and are probably should be learning, I think, their traditions, so that they can access better and more intelligibly these new tools that are barely understood. That they can exploit them more substantively. I'm not so worried about your charges. I would just be like I would just simply wanting to encourage them to have as much permission as they can to be playful and figure out how to make them be who they are in that milieu.
Yeah.
Oh, for sure. It's funny that they'll do that, but when you're trying to get them to go through the process of editing work and going back to things and pushing it further, that's where they bulk up. And
they balk at that. No,
yeah.
Because I would say that I've discovered now that my certain students would be like, if I have to put work into it, it's not worth it. And I find that a bit distressing now, as the guy who tries to do impossible things for 20 years. I look and say, no, there's actually some usefulness in exerting yourself, right? Just imagine what you could do if you could exert yourself, right?
For sure. Though I will say that our creative writing teacher tells me that the people who take visual art through all their years actually tend to be the ones who eventually, after us forcing them through this process year after year after year, start to embrace that idea that work is process, is a constant editing thing that is never. I mean, we have a saying in visual art that art is never finished. We just run out of time. It's that they become more slowly.
Well, Jackson Pollock was asked, "How do you know your painting is finished?" And his rejoinder I really love. He simply said, "How do you know when you've finished making love?" I thought it was a very wonderful rejoinder. Like, how do you know when you finish making love? I mean, in that sense, I suppose the painting is never done, really, right? I mean,
Absolutely.
Really, or alternatively, when it's done when you have your epiphany, right? Like when you have that kapow, maybe. But that's a good question. Like, the work ethic among students is different from the work ethic I grew up with. It's probably, my work ethic is probably radically different from my parents. I don't know. there's some generational shifts here that are going to be mutually misunderstood, you know.
Yes, as they always are.
Yeah.
Thank you, Katie. That was a fantastic question. We have one, Carol had a question, but before we go there, does Tanis or Pamela want to add anything to Katie's question?
I don't think I have anything to say about the technology. I think Christian would know more about that than me. But I think the only thing I want to add is thinking about the position of poetry, and it's something very recent when I think about the war in the Ukraine. I've been reading a lot of Ilya Kaminsky, and Kaminsky has written a couple of articles saying that when he writes to people in southern Russia, who's also being affected by Ukraine and Ukraine, and he speaks Russian and Ukrainian, and he asks, "What do people need? I'll send you anything you want from rich America, where I am. What do you want?" They say, "Send us poems. We want poems. We want poems that people are writing saying, we see your pain, we see the struggle that you have. It's not going unnoticed by the rest of the world," because this is, of course, their concern, that it's going unnoticed by the rest of the world.
Wow.
Right? And so they say, send us poems, send us the poems that you and other people in outside of Ukraine are writing to say that you see us. Right? So, like I said, my answer isn't about technology, but it is about like a kind of immediacy and a kind of and a kind of need for poetry that is that has been, I mean, I think it's an old need for poetry, right? I mean, the need for people to be seen in their suffering is a very old kind of need, and we're seeing it again, which makes me think that, you know, it's a plus ça change kind of thing, right? So we have new technologies, and we're using some of our new technologies to kill each other, and people are having this very old cry of, please, can you see that we're dying here?
Yeah.
Yes, thank you, Tanis, for bringing that up. That actually speaks to sort of one question we didn't get to about why is poetry sort of getting a resurgence in popularity in some areas. Some of it's through technology and some of it's through a need. But before we run out of time, I did want to give Carol an opportunity to ask her question. So go ahead, Carol.
Okay. Hi. Good evening again. Thanks for this very rich conversation, and very pleased to listen to it. So my question is coming from a place of somebody who is academic. I teach in religion and culture. I'm a sociologist by training. I love speculative fact and fiction. I've started writing and published my first story. But poetry, for me, to write short stories or longer narratives is necessary. I was introduced to poetry not on the page, but as something that you recite. And this is growing up in the post-colonial Caribbean and Antigua in the 1960s and early 1970s, and then also as sacred text in church. So I can remember reciting Langston Hughes's Freedom after another kid did a recitation from the Psalms. And this was in Toronto in a Jamaican Pentecostal church. I'm cool. Antiguan and an Anglican, but my mother didn't let us cross the street until it was time for my little brother's christening. Anyway, so my question is this. So what for you all as poets is the relationship between the performative and poetry as the word? And I'm asking this, of course, as I said, somebody in religion and culture, and given my own kind of introduction, if you will, to poetry. I'm always tickled, and I learn a lot from hearing people's responses to that. So what's your relationship between poetry as words, literary on a page, and the voice and performance?
Carol, I'll say that I too had a very traditional religious upbringing, and was taught to read and recite from the Bible from a very early age, and to the point where we would get little rewards for memorizing it, like a length of verse, right? And this was also still an era, and maybe it was just the place as well, because I grew up on the prairies, and sometimes that's we're about 10 years behind other parts of Canada, but we recited in class. We learned to recite poems in class as well. So my very early education in poetry was absolutely as something that existed on the page, but it existed in another form when you said it out loud to move or to listen to the sound of what your voice sounded like. So that remains important for me. And whenever I teach poetry, I make sure I read it out loud to the students a lot so they can hear the difference between regular speech and poetry, right? And what happens to the sound as we move through the poem, right? So and I'm always working on trying to be a better performer of my own poetry. It has become more of a challenge, of course, over Zoom, but Zoom also has its advantages, right? Because, I can look right into the camera, right? And there's a kind of intimacy that is, of course, not perfect, but that I think it affords the poetic performer a kind of venue that you don't always get if you're performing in a smoky bar with drinks being served at the back and the microphone isn't very good and squeaking and squealing. You're trying to read a love poem and it's like not intimate like at all. So yeah, I think I'll stop talking now, but say I think it remains important, certainly in spoken word poetry, but also for anyone who writes what is sometimes called page poetry. I think it is up to us to enliven it in performance to bring people into the text.
Pamela, did you want to respond to that?
Thank
I know
you.
you're saying that you sort of had found you have an affiliation with the stage, or it's a comfortable place for you.
Absolutely, but my whole schooling, in the broadest sense, the culture out of which I come is a culture of orature, not literature. Orature, right? The word in audible motion, and the thing probably that's paramount to me in prose and poetry. I sub-vocalize everything I read. If I read a novel, I hear all of those words. And that is why some novels, I won't call any names, but I will dismiss after the first page, because if it's not talking into my ear, if it's not alive in my body, right, then what is it? It must work my whole person over. And so much of what we know is what is oral, is what comes into our bodies through our ears. So yeah, it's absolutely the whole thing. I can't conceive of a poem that is not something that is spoken, that is not something that is alive in my mouth, alive in somebody else's mouth, alive in the mouth, the mind mouth of the person who wrote it. It's the bottom line. For me, it's the bottom line. I'm thinking of Christian. I watched him today. I watched all that stuff in his mouth and how it came out. And that's just, what else is there? We get into the whole business of making love and all of that. If you're making love and your mouth is shut, you're not making love.
Well, Christian, you can have the final say on this.
Well, with respect to my own practice, I would say I'm Apollonian in composition, but Dionysian in performance. You want to be. That would be my joke, I suppose. I would say that performance is usually supposed to be a Dionysian experience. It's not supposed to be an Apollonian experience. It's supposed to be something excessive and passionate and engaging, rhetorically persuasive and immersive. I think ultimately it serves a kind of purpose. It constitutes the last line in a syllogism, arguing on behalf of your own work. And as a consequence, you should perform your work in a manner which sells its merits to others who might want to read it, because it demonstrates that your investment in its liveliness, that it in fact is a living thing that has its own organic character, that it reflects something of your own existence in its manifestation, and it testifies to you in the act of performance. So when Pamela complains, or Tanis has complained about the quietude of somebody reading too quietly at the mic, or that the performance is somehow overwritten, I'd say those are testaments to the voice of the person who's speaking in that moment, and that you want to do a good job of it. You really do want to be able to have a really barbaric yop in the moment of its instantiation, right? You really want to make sure that it testifies to you, right? No matter what the work is. Now, it may be too much to ask of some people to stand up for their own work under the circumstance. I mean, most of us are probably pretty introverted, quiet people, right, who would prefer to be right, scribbling away in privacy and solitude, and that the incumbent necessity to defend the work in public by performing it adequately is an imposition. Maybe somebody else should do it for you. I don't know. Like maybe that's not the role that everybody should be allowed to do, right? But if you do it, I really think you have to. I think you have to show that you are passionately engaged with it, that you love it enough to want to make sure that it thrives, that it has a living embodiment in your own voice, that it testifies to your own best self, that you can speak on its own behalf proudly. That ultimately the best poem is supposed to be an expression of your own pride in the work you've taken to write it.
Can I quote somebody on this? A good person, I think. This is just something from George Eliot Clark, and he happened to have been talking about Afro-Caribbean poets, but I think it can do. Poets, let's say, take out the Afro-Caribbean, remind us that poetry is also music, and that the lyric poem is also a theater, a one-woman or one-man show demanding all the resources of rhetoric and drama. I think that's a nice way of saying.
Well, I agree with that sentiment, absolutely, for sure.
Yeah, I did want to say that. So normally outside of the pandemic, the Voices at Word Up is actually a venue where authors can come and share their work at the open mic. That's sort of how it originated. Obviously, it's changed during the pandemic, but we've just offered 2 courses recently that were called Performance Skills for Writers, because that's sort of our mandate, is trying to get authors out there performing the work as the best they possibly can. And we're working with Deborah Joy, who works with actors and is a voice coach out of Toronto. And it has been quite astounding for all the participants to actually perform their work as opposed to just reading it. And I think it really gave them insights into the work itself, but also just how to present it its best possible way so that they can, effectively get their work out there. And it's just been wonderful. So
totally different set of skills, totally different set of poetic aptitudes. And moreover, I think that when you actually become adept at performance, you understand something more about the technical features of your own practice and modify it. Right? You suddenly realize that there are infelicities in your work that make it difficult to render it alive.
Yes, I so agree. Yeah. Well, we have sadly come to the end of our evening. It certainly for me, passed very, very quickly. That was a wonderful discussion. So many great thoughts and so many great ideas. I really appreciate it for everybody who showed up, and definitely for our 3 panelists. You are very well-informed, well-educated, very experienced poets, and it was a real pleasure to have you here tonight. I just want to say before we leave, I want to thank our sponsors, who are the City of Barrie, which allows us to pay all of our authors, which is a great gift that we can provide to our panelists. And that also want to thank Simcoe County Tourism for a grant for our workshops. I want to thank Rhubarb Media for hosting our website, and Check Energy for hosting our Zoom. So I just wanted to say that. And our meeting in May is on comedy. We've got a great local comedian, and we have 2 comedians out of Innisfil who actually run a comedy crime podcast who are going to come and join us. And it will be a hybrid. We'll actually be back at the library. So we'll be in person and online. So if anybody's interested, it'll be a very exciting night. And that is on May, I can't remember, 12th, something like that. 2nd Thursday of the month, we always meet. So thank you again, everybody. And this will be recording will be online if anybody wants to watch it. And thank you so much for coming. I really appreciate it.
Pauline, thank you for your hospitality. And thank you, of course, to Tanis and Pamela for being so indulgent with me. I appreciate it very much, I tell you.
It's good to see everyone.
Yeah,
Lovely
to be
to
able to see everyone from afar. I'm very grateful for this ability.
And thanks,
Thank you, Carol.
for
Thank you,
showing
Tara.
up.
Ms. Sweet, thank you so much for being so gracious with
My
us.
pleasure. All right.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Take
Yeah.
care.
Thank
Bye.
you, everybody. It was fantastic.